All right, so I'm here again with Dick and Michelle, and I'm so grateful to be here with you both. Thank you. And so Dick, Michelle and I have been working together on some slides around the window of tolerance, and we thought that we might have a little bit of a conversation about how IFS kind of looks at working with, trauma, but more broadly just, with difficulties. And how we are interested. I think for a long time I thought that IFS is not interested in the window of tolerance. I haven't had great experiences with therapists who kind of like have this, like, I know what the window of tolerance is for you and I'm going to tell you how to be in it kind of thing. And so I used to think, oh, I hate the window of tolerance. I don't like what these therapists say. That's not the model I'm interested in. But I think one of the things I'm learning the longer I'm in the IFS world is we are very interested in helping a person stay within the window of tolerance. We just do it differently. And we don't perceive that the person is necessarily outside the window of tolerance just because there's a lot of, emotion or something. So yeah, I wondered if you wanted to sort of launch into saying a little bit and then we have a bit of conversation.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. Although there's something about that metaphor that I don't like. So
Okay, great.
I think it's because it's become so associated with the fear of parts and overwhelm. So I just prefer to say, yeah, allowing your client to be grounded is important, and we just have a different way of keeping people grounded.
Yeah, so I wonder if you want to say more about how you view the window of tolerance from, or maybe just anything more you want to say about that.
Yeah. So systems that are very worried about that tend to be systems that don't think about people's inner worlds in terms of parts. So to be able to not worry about it as much, you need two things. You need to know that these are parts and that they can control how much they overwhelm. And second, that self can handle most anything. Self has an enormous window of tolerance. So if you get the critical mass of self, then you just kind of relax about the issue. Even if the client is expressing distress about it. So if a client is saying this is too much, my first move generally will be to get the parts who think it's too much and she can't handle it to step back. If it persists, then I might say, let me talk to the part that's giving you all these feelings, and I'll talk to it about pulling things back just a little bit. And the part ultimately agrees, and then suddenly she's grounded again. So it's just a very different way of handling this because it's such a different paradigm. So.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, can you share a little bit more about when you discovered self has that enormous capacity?
It took a long time because like most systems, feared the overwhelm and didn't really know how to handle it. My threshold was raised by hanging around the Hakomi community because when I would do that, and I spent a lot of time with Ron Kurtz and retreats, and they despite the fact that a lot of that comes from that community in the sense that Pat Ogden is probably the biggest proponent of that whole idea. When people would get emotional, they often would say, okay, keep going, this is good. Just stay with it, stay with it. And that helped me see that it was possible for people to feel a lot of emotion and not freak out. And I'm not sure what happened for and it may be that because Pat started working more and more with highly, highly traumatized systems that she became such a proponent, because her background is from Hakomi. So anyway, I'm not sure about what happened to make that kind of disconnect, but I was hanging around with that community, and then I just started to just check and see what happened. I think the biggest breakthrough for me was coming to the realization that parts can control how much they overwhelm. And that's probably 30 years ago, when I really started to believe it. And they would just talk, I would talk to them about, why do you feel the need to take over this way? And they would talk about how if they don't take over this way, they'll never have any access, because as soon as they relent, then they get thrown back in exile. And so then I started saying, well, oh, so you don't have to take over that way? You don't, it's not automatic? And they'd say, no. In fact, I'd rather not, but I'll get locked up again if I don't. So when I got that, then I started just to negotiate with them. And so for a while, I was still afraid of it, but I would focus more on the exile, not pulling the self totally into its feelings. And then my threshold started to increase, and I think partly from personal work I was doing. And so then my focus shifted more toward helping the parts that were getting so scared as the exile was giving the client their feelings, helping those parts relax. So when I'm with somebody and they're in it, and I'm saying things like, this is great, just keep going, it's okay, you can do it. Mainly I'm speaking to the protectors that are so scared and think this is a catastrophe. So that's become my focus more, is just helping those other protectors relax while this is happening. And yeah.
Yeah, so it sounds like you worked with your own parts that worried about other people's overwhelm while you were learning about the parts could control how much they were blending in.
Yeah, and it was a bit of a desensitization process for me of, okay, let me try it. If we take this next step, could this really be possible? And this next step, and just over time, it got to where, and I was blessed to have some trauma survivors, of very, very severe trauma, who I could try things out with, and who were more or less collaborators, and would want to experiment on their own system. And so we would try things out, and they'd tell me what I was doing wrong, and so on.
I think it's really interesting. One of the things that I love about the model, Michelle and I have put together some slides, and we've sort of got a few dot points, and one of them is about how we know that self has this huge window of tolerance, okay, and can be with anything. And so as the exiles, letting the person really understand their experience, it's not too much. And as the therapist, I love the fact that in IFS, we don't, I once heard a trauma therapist tell me that the therapist always has the last say on safety. And I was like, really? Like, I'm not sure that's true. I think as the client, I have the last say on safety, on what's too much for me. And then I thought about it, and I thought, it's something we navigate together. And so I love the questions in IFS where we say, is this okay to be with? And I had this lady who, when she was a child, any emotion was wrong. So if she was happy, she wasn't happy enough, or she was too happy, you know, or if she was sad. And so she learned to have a real poker face. Okay. And so she would come into session, and you know, like, it's so interesting to me because we think we use that question when someone seems really upregulated, right? And it's like, is this okay to be with? And every now and again she would just get like one tear or something, and I'd be like, is this okay? And I remember at one point I asked her, and she said, oh, this is completely terrifying. But her affect was so calm, you know. And so I love the fact that in IFS we kind of like finding a space together to know where the person's being really overwhelmed internally, and where they're doing fine, and as you say, ask the part to maybe not give quite so much, so it's not as scary. And I also just thinking through in my mind about that reassurance of protectors when the exile's really letting the person know. And there is a lot of self, there's still protectors in the background who might be sort of going, oh, this is a bit, you know, hard to stay back here. There's some self and there's parts here, but I'm sitting here a little bit anxious, and the therapist just being there and saying, you know, this is fine, I'm fine, and you're doing great. It's just so reassuring for them.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking the exception to all of what I'm saying is where the overwhelm could potentially set off a dangerous firefighter.
Yeah.
So, and I learned the hard way of that possibility. So that's some of the art of the work, because it's important to know in advance if there are dangerous firefighters, like suicidal parts, or, you know, there are always firefighters that the system thinks are dangerous, but and they aren't necessarily, but there are some that are dangerous. And so so it's good to ask up front, are there such parts, and work with them in advance. And then if protectors are interfering in a huge way, to not keep going, to not force it, and to stop and interview them. And often they'll say things like, yeah, if this keeps going, she'll kill herself. And I said, oh, is there a suicidal part in there? Yeah, there is. Okay, well, we won't keep going until we work with that. And so then we go find the suicidal part, do a big piece of work with it, and now the system relaxes and we can finish. So anyway, that's the exception to what I was saying.
Yeah, did you want to say something, Michelle?
No, I was going to say that's a great point that people need to know. Yeah.
Well, I was interested, there was two things going on in my mind. One was, you say it's good to know up front, and then I was kind of like in my mind, I don't really assess in that way, but I do, you know, like by being with the person, you kind of start to, as you say, something's going on here, right? And you're like, something's going on. What's happening? There's something that's difficult, and that's when we start to slow down enough to hear that there's another part. But I wonder, do you actually assess up front, Dick?
Yeah, you know, I will ask if it's a highly traumatized system. I'll ask almost always, it's before I get to the exiles, are there suicidal parts? Are there self-harm parts? Are there addictive parts that we need to worry about? And if there are, then we'll work with them first.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things that I was thinking about was about how the system is self-correcting, and I do like that. That if we do miss something, if something gets a bit too close to something, there will be a backlash, and so that's a great message to us, you know.
Yeah. And that's another misunderstanding, that if you don't think about these systems systemically, then the backlash becomes pathologized. And you think, oh, this client is sicker than I thought. She's totally dissociated now, or, you know, she she's had this major depression now, or she's suicidal.
Mhm.
And so one of the liberating things about IFS is how we just don't do that ever. And everything is a part. Every symptom isn't a sign of pathology. It's just a part that's reacting to something probably you did the last session. And if you stay curious and calm and just start to interview it, usually direct access, it'll tell you what its fears are and why it jumped up so big.
Right, and even that helps the client when they can see, or when their other parts can see, that it's just another part of them. It's not this huge way that they always are, right? When clients begin to see that those are parts of themselves too, that helps lessen the extreme or the worry inside.
Yeah. Yeah, and many of those clients who have a history of being in other forms of therapy or hospitalizations, or and where they got the message that all these things are terrifying and signs of real severe pathology. So it's both a combination of helping therapists not fear these things, and then also helping clients not fear them.
Yeah,
Because
I
the
know.
actual fear then compounds the whole thing.
Sorry, the fear compounds it then.
Yeah.
Yeah. When we were in Esalen, I remember there was a therapist there who had asked the question about, how do we make sure we don't go too fast? And I remember, well, maybe I'll just pause. How would you respond to that, Dick?
What do you remember?
Well, I remember being a bit annoyed that, like, why are we so worried all the time, and so I suppose what I was thinking about was, like, what I remember was spoken about was that, like you sort of, I don't remember exactly what you'd said, but I remember I did get annoyed, kind of like, we can really trust the person to know, okay? And as long as we stay with them, there's not really too much going too fast unless they have a pushing part inside that's kind of pushing an agenda and we're following that and not realizing there's a whole bunch of protectors who are kicking and screaming in the background. But by and large, if we're just staying with them and we're not the ones pushing, then, we can't, in my mind, my experience is I'm not really going too fast. And if something is going on that I'm not aware of, eventually the system lets me know and I'm like, okay, let's slow down and find out how that happened. But I do remember you said to me, because I was like, oh, can we stop being so afraid all the time of, like this thing, this like a person getting a little bit dysregulated because, and you said, well, we can go too fast, Stephanie, but what we do is we're just available to the person at that point. If something happens and there's some backlash, they have my phone number and they can call me and say, this thing's going on. I feel suicidal, or I just want to, whatever. That feels terrible.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is another mistake a lot of systems make with all the boundaries.
Yeah.
And not being available. So what I learned, again, the hard way, is when people start going to their exiles, and what others, Hakomi used to call it riding the rapids, when they're really going down that chute, they need access, or at least they need the potential for access. And if you have some rules about you can only call me so many times, or you can only see me during sessions, or that drives these parts crazy, the protectors in particular, because they know they need to be able to contact you if they need to. And so I would give my clients full access anytime when we're going through that riding the rapids phase. And I never had a client abuse the privilege. It was, that's the big fear, is clients are going to invade your life. But it's almost like knowing they can is so comforting that they don't. And and it's just that knowledge that you're going to be there if they need you that allows them to do so much on their own. And so many, many therapists get into these vicious cycles by being withholding, not only through the boundaries, but also, you know, there are a lot of clients who need to know you care about them and you even need to know you love them. And so many, many therapists are taught to be very withholding about that for fear of transference and so on. And, you know, you can be very clear about what you mean when you say you really, really care about somebody. And the big advantage we have is self, because if you're helping them take care of their own parts, their own exiles that flash all this transference onto you, then it's just very different. So it's not nearly the same issue as it is if you become the good parent, the good attachment figure for the client, and then all the transference is on you all the time. So that's a big advantage we have as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that frees me up to do things that other systems have a lot of rules about. And you know, I still have my boundaries, but you know, if a client wants to know if I care about them, I say absolutely. And if they want to know about parts of me that might be getting in the way, I'll be honest about that and encourage them to notice when they see them. So there's a lot more transparency, a lot more two people trying to help each other, or one trying to help the other, but we're just two people in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one thing that helped some of my parts around that availability between sessions was also just trusting their system knows how to care for itself also. And with that, you know, exception of if there's dangerous firefighters, then there's this other piece that we have to work with and deal with. But by and large, between sessions, their system has become, you know, synced with how they deal with conflict or things that go on. We can be available and also know that something's going to correct in them enough to get them through till the next session, or they may need to have a little bit here and there, but I don't know, that was something that always helped a couple parts of me know that, yeah, their system knows what it's doing. And, you know, different managers may come online or they may binge on a TV episode or, you know, show for the weekend or something, but still having that availability and knowing that their system knows how to care for itself too.
Yeah, and there's an exception to that, which is if they live in a very dangerous or volatile or triggering environment, then it can be, then they can get triggered. Then their scary firefighters can get triggered.
Right.
And so that, if that's the case, we will go slower. We will keep an eye on that environment and maybe do some work in the external world around it. And For so long, we've been saying, just calm down. Why are you getting so upset about Black Lives Matter or
Mhm.
the police abuse? And, you know, it escalated and escalated. And, excuse me, now people are finally listening a little bit. And it's great that if we think of the movement as a part, that the part's determined to keep it going until they really see change. And the same is true with our parts. They won't calm down when they have a real point about what you're doing to them or how you're not listening about something that's off in your life. And they will escalate until you do listen. And they won't let up, and they shouldn't until you change it.
Yeah, and another thing that's been really helpful for me in my system is that noticing when, you know, the part that's going kind of like really flooding and going off, how much it's stuck in the past. So even though it's going off about the now,
Yeah.
to just keep going, what is this like? And why does this feel like it's bigger than Ben-Hur? And and where does that lie in my history? And then usually at the time that it's really big, I might not at first know who it is or what that's about. But when I sort of go, oh, well, that makes so much sense because of these things, then I can go specifically to the part. Before that, it's kind of a blurry, just overwhelm. That always is so helpful to me to go, oh, okay, this part's worried because this thing over here in my adult life feels very much like this. So how do we go back and work with that old experience?
Yeah. So it's you know, it's a little bit of a dance because there is the fear that if you think it's all about this part being stuck in the past, then you're not going to take the message seriously about the present. And a lot of times it is a part that's burdened and stuck in the past, but it has a really good point about what's happening in the present too. And if you can unburden it and help it, you know, be in itself more, then first of all, it's easier for you to listen to it, and second, it won't polarize with a lot of other parts, and then you can get all your parts on board to change the thing that's real in the present. And it's also important to say that there are times where it's not about the past at all. It's not about a burden. The part's just saying, "Wake up! You gotta change your life."
Can you give us an example, Dick?
Of that,
Yeah.
there are lots of examples. It's late here. My brain is pretty
I
fried.
just thought, I remember you saying once in a podcast about how when you were leaving your ex-wife, that there was kind of like your physical health became a wake-up call.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's an example. Yeah, I had to have a heart issue, and it felt like as I listened that there was a part that, I mean, this is after the fact, but there was a part that was trying to wake me up about how I needed to make a change that way. And it was using that heart valve to do that. And yeah, and that's, you know, if you don't listen, they'll escalate. And they'll escalate and it can be very dangerous to your health. You know, we do a lot with medical symptoms, and often the symptom is just a part that wasn't listened to directly, and it had no choice but to actually use what what it can get hold of in your body. So
I'm really curious now that you've raised that, how do you, is it just the more self you get that you start to be able to see things a little bit more clearly, but how do you then pull apart where something is a tormentor in your life and is important to turn towards, to, you know, like look at, how much of that is me just having to do my work so that it's like a growth opportunity, and how much of it is, you know, a point at which you decide,
yeah,
tormented me
it
enough.
yeah, it can be both. So there are these people in our lives whose job it is to bring up parts we need to heal.
Mm.
And we can graduate, you know, we can get the lesson, and we don't need them to keep doing that to bring the stuff up. And we can decide, okay, that's enough, and see you later. So it's not like every tormentor, like Donald Trump is a tormentor for all of us, and it's time for him to go.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've healed enough parts he brought up, and he can leave.
Yeah.
You know, there is that fear that the therapy can become that opiate for the masses, and, you know, reduce your inclination to try and change things that need to change in the outside world, because it's there's so much emphasis on how it's really about your childhood.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, I'm aware we've got maybe about 15 minutes left, right? So
Mm-hmm.
one of the other points, if it's okay to go on to another point on our slide, is that self is contagious and so are protectors. And so just as far as the window of tolerance goes, just, you know, as we're working with clients, noticing our own, kind of always keeping a tab on how much of our own self is there, right? To help with that tuning fork, if you will, with our clients, but also noticing our own parts that are there that can prevent our work and getting towards the exiles, and, you know, prohibiting some of that work. So just that maybe we'll open that piece up for a conversation too, and see what you might want to add to that.
So that just emphasizes the importance of you as a therapist staying in self, even when your client isn't, and even when your client is triggering the hell out of your parts. And that's the big challenge for IFS therapists. And the only way you can do that is if you've done work with your parts, so that you know them, you know the impact they have on your body in the moment. You can really tell when a part's getting triggered. You know it's just a part, like we were talking about. You can immediately sense its impact and ask it to just wait, to just give you a little space, to just, you'll talk to it after, you might even do a piece of work with it after, you can reassure it about all of that. But just let you stay with an open heart. And it's also important to know the physical markers for being in self. And there are those, and the more you meditate, the more you get a knowledge of that. And so I can very quickly tell if my heart's closed, or if I've got a big agenda, or if I've lost curiosity, or if all those things. I'm just noticing. I mean, not all the time, because there are a lot of clients that don't trigger me. But if I'm with a client or a person in my life who typically triggers me, I'll even do a pre-meeting pep talk with my parts, and then I'll be very consciously monitoring how much self I'm in, or how much parts are being triggered during the session, and I'll be talking to them throughout. And if one takes over, I'll own it and apologize to the client. And that way your clients are great tormentors. They teach you what you need to heal. And And I give permission to my clients to bust my parts.
Mhm.
So, and then if you can stay in self, that will be like a tuning fork for your client, because it'll vibrate here, and then that'll start their self to vibrate, and their protectors will sense the safety, because they can sense all that calm and clarity and courage coming from you, and compassion. So the protectors relax more. So that's how self is contagious. And parts are contagious just because their extremes trigger yours. And then yours start to take over, and then you're off to the races. And, you know, most of this country is now, it's all about parts wars, and
Mm.
very little self to be found these days. Although, you know, I'm very heartened by all the protests, because they seem to be very self-led, and are driving the Republicans crazy because of that. So.
Yeah, and I was just thinking about self making all the difference in this model, and how, you know, this is the dilemma when we go off and we learn a model and we sort of want to learn a technique, you know, that really the work continues to be about noticing when I'm in self or in a part. And there's something also, because we are today talking about the window of tolerance, one of the points on the slide that's really important to me is this sense of, in your book, you talk about the fact that we enter this liminal state with the client, okay? And when we're really in that space of them turning inward, they end up in this space of like dual awareness, being here and there, inside and outside at once. And I remember, if I think about, you know, that happens every session, or when we're just speaking to parts, but specifically during unburdenings, when, or even just witnessing when it's really, you know, there's a lot going on inside and it might look like a lot. The sense of really, I think that's something so powerful in this model, is that sense of really trusting that when there's enough self with their person, from the therapist and their own self, that that you're experiencing this really important thing, and you can hear something new in that moment, and you're also really kind of calm alongside the intensity.
It is this dual sense of being in the moment, and the client feeling your presence in the moment,
Mm-hmm.
while they're in this other world, while they're in the past, and not feeling alone in it. And that's another reason to really stay in self.
I think along the line of that dual awareness is that you know, blending kind of lies on a continuum when we're looking at the window of tolerance. And you know, we talk about the critical mass of self being there with our client as they're witnessing and unblending, and you know, noticing that as they're witnessing their parts, and there might be a range of the part blending to let them really get the, you know, their history or their experience. You know, sometimes with my clients, I do a little thing, just inviting the part to notice how it feels when they're fully blended versus when they are allowing self to be present. And just, I think that's important for people to be aware of that continuum of blending, and noticing that it's not, you know, as long as I'm in self and I feel there's enough self in the client, that we don't have to worry about this, you know, being too much.
Yeah, and what you're saying, you know, we were talking earlier about between sessions and not teaching those skills, but I'll do that in sessions with some clients. I will say, I want you to really blend with this part now, and in the session. Or I might have them think of something that's going to really trigger the part. And I'll say, okay, now I want you to do what you're going to do next week. And it becomes a kind of practice session where they just practice unblending and being with the part. And then I let them go and they can actually do it. And I'll have them audio tape the session so that they remember. So, yeah.
That's a great example.
Yeah, I really like that. It's one of the things that I do is I record all my sessions, and then sometimes just during the week, just going back and re-listening to it helps my part settle. You know, if I've done a big piece of work and it just feels kind of bigger than Ben-Hur during the week, if I re-listen to it, it's kind of helps everyone. It's like, I don't know what it is about going back into that space and hearing that we survived it and it's okay, and the part gets to be re-witnessed again almost, you know, in the re-listening. And yeah,
That's right. Yeah, because there's so much you forget if you are just doing the session, and so playing it later is a great way to stay fresh with the information, and then also to have your parts feel witnessed once again, and to be part of the commitment to staying with them during the week.
yeah, especially when, you know, I have managers who like to get real busy in the week and kind of like block out everyone. So it's like a little, you know, it's hard. It's sometimes really hard for my managers to give a bit of space. But if I go and re-listen, then it's easier to access those places, those parts that maybe other parts are like, keep away from them for the next 5 days because I don't want to, yeah, because we've got work to do. So, yeah. Great. Is there anything else you wanted to say before we finish, Michelle?
I don't think so. I had an example, but I don't think we need to go into that. So
Really? Well, I thought one of the things we might do is like a fun story at the end of each session, if one of us wants to bring. So I don't know if you have something you wanted to bring.
Well, I guess this goes with one of the points on there that on our slide of we can let protectors know that self can do the witnessing, so that the protectors don't have to worry about the overwhelm. Sometimes it's the protectors worried about, I don't want to remember this and see this, and we can invite them to, you know, not be present during the witnessing. I once had a client who, their exile was so exiled, it was like in a bunker like 500 feet under the ground, you know. And we, you know, the system naturally had it set up such that, okay, once they got to understand that that client self was enough and that they trusted me, they allowed us to go down into the earth and let the protector stay up there while that whole witnessing was taking place. And then once the unburdening happened, we could invite them through a telescope to see what that part looked like, and then they were fine to let it out. So I think it's just a nice way of just reminding parts that, you know, they don't have to be the ones doing this. It's self doing the witnessing.
That's right.
Yeah, and just the beauty of, I think each system has their own natural creativity in there around all of that, and we can trust that too. That's something I didn't have to fabricate. It was kind of already just in that landscape, and, you know, just reminding those protectors, you know, this guy's got it.
Exactly.
All right. Well, thank you both.
Likewise, thank you. Good to see you all.
Yeah.
Good to see you guys.